Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning! Welcome to a quick little thingamadeal here on the post-game for Tactics Ogre PSP. Now, this is hopefully going to be a little bit enlightening for those folks that maybe have only played Reborn and were wondering how on earth it is that a post game that is generally considered to be, pretty good by those folks that played it in Reborn was absolutely and utterly reviled in its original release. Like, how is it that nobody used to touch this post game before the Reborn version, despite it functionally speaking being the same thing? I mean, there's like a million asterisks behind that, but that's what this video is for, okay? And it basically just comes down to a lot of things that Reborn ended up changing, and one of those reasons that I tell people to just stop bitching about the level caps, because, oh my god, you don't appreciate how good you've got it. Okay, let's go ahead and get into it. First of all here, what you have to understand is that in the PSP version, unlike Reborn, which uses a more traditional, you level up your characters, they get stronger, you get better equipment, they get stronger, okay, all well and good, you get like one straight line going forward type situation, you kind of had like a four-pillar system going on here in this original PSP version. On top of that, it's worth noting that the version that we got, that the DLC is actually balanced around, was balanced around the wrong version of the game. So the Japanese and Western releases of Tactics Ogre actually had two different versions. Now, basically, this was kind of similar to, like, let's say, you got your Pokemon Reds and Blues, and then they come back with the Yellow, and they're like, hey, look, we fixed a bunch of things. Or you got your Crystal version coming out after. And for the most part, it's improvements. But there are some things that are generally going to be potentially missed in the shuffle, especially with a game this large. And right here is one of those situations that you're looking at right now. Because when you've ever heard me say, hey, the levels don't matter that much, they really don't. If you tried to simply power level your way through this particular version, you might be able to get away with it for about 10 levels or so. If you overdo it, and that overdoing it will depend entirely on whatever map you're going to at any given time, and there's absolutely no indicator as to whether or not this will happen, it may just suddenly turn into high level mode, because every map is actually spawned in from a sort of collection of different versions in this one. So to explain what's going on with these different versions, first of all, we actually have to backtrack real. Alright, cool. Apparently I've got hiccups, and now they're hopefully gone. Let's try this yet again. So, okay, here's how the levels work in this version, because if you played Reborn, obviously you just kind of, you go up. It's a straight line. The only way you're resetting your level in that one is if you go and Ogre Blade somebody into a lower level, and then bing, bada bing, bada boom, double the mental stats, all well and nifty. Now, in this version, though, each character is actually separate from the class themselves. So the four pillars that I'm talking about when it comes to a character, we've got the base stats over here. So this is going to be the person themselves. These are a number that can go up to 100. On the right here are the derived stats, which can be seen as the class stats. Essentially, the base stats plus the class stats equals this, as well as equipment. But we'll get to that. On top of that, we've got the equipment itself, as well as any skill bonuses that it provides, and then on top of that we have the skills that end up adding on top of this. On top of that, there's kind of a sort of fifth layer into this whole thing that is technically part of the skills, and that is going to be all of your passives. Now, here's the problem with all of this, because eventually all roads lead to grind within this particular system, and that's the annoying part. At least when it comes to the post-game. See, the main story portion of the game is relatively easy. If you even halfway optimize your team, there's very few moments in which you're actually going to have too much of a struggle. It's usually going to be a pretty fair fight, all well and good. But the post-game, if you try to enter the post-game with those teams, you will absolutely get your ass whooped. Because your team ain't ready for it. Now, to go back to the previous point of all roads lead to grind, that's why, for example, you saw Ravenous doing 1 damage to a generic Griffin. Now, why is this? The Scorpion is one of the best spears in Reborn. Well, in this one, the direct primary attack power of the weapon is going to be extremely important. If it doesn't break past a certain threshold, it just straight up won't do stuff. So this means that all of those cool debuff weapons that, you could use to do fun builds in Reborn, yeah, they last for like an hour or two to in this version, and then you throw them in the trash because they can't hurt anything anymore. So then we take a look at the sort of more traditionally powerful weapons. So these are going to be your elemental weapons. Basically, to even get anywhere in the postgame, you are usually going to want either high-end crafted or elemental style weapons. Now, elementals typically have two tiers, your lower tier and your higher tier. And whether or not you really directly need them, there's a few asterisks to this because it also depends on the category. See, this was a single class challenge that I did that I feel very comfortably emphasizes the problem with everything that we saw here. Actually, before we get into that, one little wrinkle that I kind of missed here is the fact that every time a character levels up as a class, everyone that participated in that fight that took a level also gets a permanent bonus to their stats. Now, this is where the big break from the Japanese version comes in, because in this one, our gains are typically like 0.1 to 0.2 per stat across the board per level. Okay, reasonable, all well and good. It's about 10 times that in the Japanese version. Now, it's roughly speaking more like 2 to 10 times, but again, it varies. Just the fact that you could see entire stat points going up over the course of a single fight is kind of nutty. But anyway, with that being said, stat gains in the Japanese version are absolutely insane, but this also means that time to kill is generally slower, or generally faster, sorry, in that version, which also means that usually, the way that it seems to have been intended to be balanced is that we end up getting characters that have higher skills, they had characters that had higher stats. And ultimately, you want both anyway, so it's just kind of, pick your poison kind of a thing. And this is actually one of those things we'll be covering in the sort of Japanese version differences, because on that end, surprisingly, despite having way lower stats, we got the good version. Because in that one, in order to compensate for all of those higher stats, the crafting rates were way lower. I sure hope you like your 37% chance to successfully make some chainmail. Because that shit sucked. Anyway, so yeah, as far as all this stuff is concerned, we sort of won out on the crafting department, which is amazing because the crafting in this version is still abhorrent. But we still technically got the better end of that equation. As far as the skills, though, there's a pretty decent chance that that never was going to work as intended. While, in some cases you got the skills high enough, in many cases it just simply wasn't enough to get the job done. See, in order to, again, still hurt something, you need both a good quality weapon to actually match the level that you're at, which these can no longer do, because everything that's on the field is more or less able to fully resist these weapons right here. But additionally, you want to have the skills to back it up, which these guys also only kind of sort of do. They're about halfway to the maximum rank there. Or they expect you to have cross-classed everybody across multiple different classes, which again makes a single-class challenge especially difficult in this version. And it's especially difficult in a really bizarre manner, because this is when we get to spawning. So that's what I was trying to get at about 10 minutes ago. So let's talk about spawning and level brackets and all of that some such bullshittery. Okay. We're going to load up a different save file here to show you what I mean. So for this one, I think we'll go ahead and get what was previously a no in-cap run and just kind of show you a few details that can pop out here. Actually, we'll go into Pirate's Graveyard, I think. Should be a pretty decent idea of what we're looking at here. So the post-game ends up adding a bunch of tools to the AI that previously were not there. So when it came to the post-game in Reborn, you generally might realize that your levels were basically scaled to the stuff that you were fighting. So when you went to random dungeons, if you went in at a lower level, they joined at a lower level. You went at a higher level, they joined at a higher level. Unless it was a story fight, which might have a particular level bracket to it, it always scaled to you. And you do see the occasional person showing up in the comments like, oh my god, my immersion, they scaled to me! I can genuinely not tell whether that person's trolling or seriously that pissed that they have left that comment like 27 times at this point. But no, the scaling is a good thing. It means that people are roughly on par. But due to the way that skills and stats and everything else are split up in this version, more or less what we end up seeing is that there's a number of ways in which you can wind up getting completely screwed. So in this particular case, we have a completely different situation from before. This is when I knew a little bit better, and again, this was originally a no in-cap run. So this is a team that played it relatively safe, that had a pretty decent amount of high penetration weapons, but it also felt way too broken to use archers. So I ended up using warriors with short bows and swords instead, which, by the way, to give you an idea of how often they use their bows compared with their swords, maximum rank bows, swords are at 1.3% trained up to rank 2. So, not very helpful. That they got counterattacks a couple of times. So we were playing it exceptionally safe in this particular one here. Anyway, so, okay, we're getting a little bit off track, though. So let's go ahead and talk spawns real quick. So one of the things that your level dictates is going to be what enemies actually come in with. And this is a really interestingly over-engineered system, because enemies don't actually come with fixed things that they're supposed to bring in. That's actually something that Reborn ended up changing as well, where the AI essentially had their finishers disabled, and additionally they were more or less locked into whatever their build was supposed to be. They had some variation in terms of what they would bring, but they would typically be almost intentionally held back from what they could potentially be using. And what's funny is that it's not that that's a completely new idea, it's just that the system in place in this version, well, they were missing a few pieces to fully implement that vision. So, like, for example, you'll notice with the weapons, almost all your generic grunts, even in the ultra-high level versions, will only come in at rank 3 of 8. This is to make it so that they only get access to one basic finisher, and on top of that, they're actually given to weapon categories, something that is oftentimes actually impossible to make use of at the same time. Now, while there is the little detail that using a weapon skill also gives you resistance to that weapon skill, this seems to be a threefold thing that they tried to do here. For one, if you recruit a unit, like if you're thinking, oh man, these guys have rank 2 overpower. That sounds amazing. Rank 3 deflection. Holy shit, that would have taken me hours to rank up. Yeah, you're never going to be able to recruit them to steal those skills, because it'll only ever give you the first 4 on the list. So you would essentially recruit this guy, get True Strike, Constitution, Throne, and Fists. Wow, what a complete waste of a party slot. Anyway, so, okay, that's kind of weird. Second thing, just to bring up here, when it comes to deflect and overpower. So parry and deflect were actually merged into just parry for Reborn. They were added to your weapon's quality as just a feature, and that was the end of that. It just had a fixed rank, it triggered or it didn't on one-handed weapons, right? Now, what's going on here? Well, this is a skill that you could passively put on people. You would either pick parry or deflect, depending on which one you want, whether you wanted to, parry melee attacks or deflect ranged attacks, as long as it wasn't a gun. And then additionally, if you wanted to blow through that, you had stuff like overpower. And here's the thing with both of these. You couldn't... It's not that you directly couldn't. You were not training these up within any reasonable amount of time. Like, the ranks that the AI would come in with, one of the reasons that the post-game became so annoying in this version is because of the utterly impossible ranks that the AI would actually have compared with you. It was almost this constant source of irritation that you would look at their weapon skills and they're lower than what you've got, but then you take a look at their defensive skills and it's like, yeah, bullshit, this guy got rank 3 deflection. I mean, I've showed a solo run of this game before where I was intentionally trying to max out deflect. It got to rank 2 and then part of the way to rank 3 over the course of that entire playthrough. Like through all the entire story, through the story a second time to go pick up the characters that were needed, and through all the coda chapters. And it still only got up to rank 2. They were the only one in the party getting shot at all the time. And they were getting shot at constantly. And it still never ranked up that far. So this random NPC is better than a solo run character defensively. As far as overpower, same thing, because this skill only ranks up in situations in which it triggers versus a character that just triggered their parry or deflect. This allows you to blow through the parry or deflect skills. So, yeah, this was, again, just like in Reborn, they just worked it into Vigorous and Eagle Eye, but yeah, it's like one of these abilities that comes in strictly for the purpose of overcoming this annoyance in the late game, but because you don't have overpower at rank 3, oh, I'm sorry, the deflect just went off anyway. So your overpower has to overpower the defensive skill of the other unit, and even then, it's like there's like a 5% chance for it to train if you hit the guy in the first place. Like, it's just so annoyingly designed from so many different perspectives. But this is all again just kind of part of the issue. Okay. So the AI spawns are dictated based off of your level at any given time. There's a low-level version, a high-level version, and a New Game Plus type of version to all of it. In Coda, pretty much everything runs the New Game Plus version, except for some cases where they just kind of randomly don't. Now, why is this particularly relevant? What's the story there? Well, the thing is, if you're going into the post game by this point, if your weapon skills are high enough, your stats are good enough, your gear will still not be good enough. It still won't be enough to actually get anything meaningful done. So we'll go ahead and retreat out of this one real quick. Actually, no, wait, right. I was meaning to show off the hammers. Sorry. Got a little bit scatterbrained there, got a little bit sidetracked. It happens with this particular topic. Okay, so let's say he's got the Treno skills. He's got, basically the best fist weapon in the game. And he's still not exactly too much of a threat to a lot of the things here. But you'll notice that they are scaling a little bit higher than we are. This still seems like a fair fight. Okay, this still seems reasonably powerful. And you'll also notice that, again, he's still getting regularly bodied by beast units because these guys are just going to scale up exceptionally quick in the postgame. During the main story, they're not too much of an issue. Once you get into the postgame, though, like you thought Reborn's kind of power birds were scary. Yeah, every beast unit in the postgame in the PSP version is an absolute frickin' monster. Like, these guys are just like basically Godzilla level threats on their own. So they're just sitting there just constantly poison raining away your entire team because of the gigantic stat creep that they end up getting at this point because your equipment caps off past a certain point. So we're basically in a position that certain weapon types may potentially be able to keep up with the sort of power creep that ends up happening. But there's a lot of different ways that you can wind up landing in the post game. Okay, there's a lot of different ways that this can potentially play out, and that utter inconsistency is part of the problem of why folks generally had a bit of a hard time with this one. And why most didn't end up getting into it, because, like, let's say they've just gone through the Elemental Temples, they've gone through Palace of the Dead, and that's what this save file is right here. I'm just going to set them to AI and see if you can notice the difference between how these different characters ended up growing over the course of this playthrough, okay? So we've got Canopus. He's been doing mostly his same thing from the very beginning. We're going to take away those guys. And we're also going to show off a couple of interesting bits and pieces here that were at least somewhat cool. Okay, so this whole situation here, where we've got the AI running ultra defensive skills, we've got passives that are functionally required for most things to actually work. It leads to a lot of very strange directions of power creep. Again, stuff tends to scale out of control. Like this party right here, kind of spoiler on this whole thing, cannot complete San Bronza. Because partway through, it just randomly jumps up to like level 40, 45, stuff like that. And simply put, every monster character on there just scales past the point that anybody on this team can do anything. Ozma, at this current level of the very bottom of it, with her double ice blades, would more than likely be able to one-shot most things on the team here. And then if we, let's say, go and focus on these guys, we'll see that she is, functionally speaking, able to, again, one-shot basically everything on their side as well. So she's an absolute powerhouse. Now, that's all well and cool, but she ends up doing ones just a few maps later, okay? So it's a case of just like the balance and the pacing and everything else is so weirdly designed that they're like, here's this really low level to come in, and then this really high level all of a sudden to come in later. So that's more of an annoying inconsistency. You have other cases where, let's say, I was bound and determined in this particular playthrough to see somebody like Rudlam being decent with a dagger. So I was experimenting around with different dagger builds. I had my main warlocks constantly sparring with Balder daggers in the back of the party, whereas this guy was going and using his Damasc dagger to try and stun things. And oftentimes it completely bounces off, but occasionally he'll run into a soft target that he can actually be a decent threat with. I mean, he doesn't physically want to contend with anything, but it's at least cool that he can, theoretically do that. So it's neat. It's not really the end-all be-all or anything, but it was one of those few moments where it felt like creativity was actually being rewarded in this one, because in most cases, once you get to the late game, once you get to the post game and stuff like that, if you are not hyper-fixated on a particular thing, almost all generalist type of stuff tends to fall off entirely. So, like in this case, he's managing to do this despite the fact that he only has rank 4 daggers, and despite the fact that he doesn't have any physical skills backing that up. Meanwhile, though, we go ahead and take a look at Canopus, and how do archers compare with everybody else? Oh, it's fine. With a tremendous shot, they can also one-shot everything on this map. Nothing to see here, just easy, clean sweep. And this is the weird part of all this. Because oh yeah, and I probably forgot to mention that they can potentially double overkill if they add an instill to this as well, so why not? We'll go ahead and throw that on there too. Now, a couple other random side notes for the Reborn players here. So short bows have basically capped out by this point. There are no elemental short bows. If you're wondering why he's using an Excamilles in both hands, that's just kind of how that works. Second of all, with daggers, why are they using daggers as a primary weapon instead of an offhand? Like right here, he's using this as an anti-undead dagger. It's because in this version, staffs didn't get a distance bonus. The only character that got a distance bonus on their spells was the basic wizard. In fact, the basic wizard oftentimes ended up being people's favorite caster type. Because while the Warlocks got Draconics, the Draconics would end up only showing up in the post-game and required consumables that you could only carry a maximum stack of 99 of, and had to go back through Palace of the Dead in order to go replenish. So very annoying spells to use. Meanwhile, you got your basic wizards, they got their range extension, they're the only ones that learn Meditate naturally, they get access to most of the spells. It's just kind of a no-brainer. Anyway, so I haven't really gotten to the main egregious stuff yet. Like, so far, okay, there's some weird imbalances, sure. Like, it's weird that Murden is kind of just a tag-along here. He's basically the Krillin of the group. He's just kind of here. He's theoretically threatening against everything in the story, but now that we've gotten into the post-game, shit's gotten too real for our poor guy over there, so he's not really too much of a threat. He couldn't reasonably hold himself in a 1v1 versus anything here. But, again, standard old Canopus over there, he's able to happily just one-shot most things on this map. Meanwhile, we've got our, soldier over there. He's going to do ones against everything within a few maps as well. And this inconsistency is just annoying to say the least. Because it's not that there aren't ways around it, but if you haven't prepared for ways around it, you're gonna have yourself a bad time. And many people didn't end up actually preparing for ways around it. Like in this particular case, I was trying to go for a kind of more traditional party, as it were, and they did okay. Like, they did okay up until the point that they didn't. They have their glowing moments of certain characters being particularly powerful, but I want you to remember that detail. They are specifically relying on a small handful of characters that are able to absolutely thunderdunk stuff, and meanwhile everybody else is having a little bit of a hard time. Again, asterisks to all of this, of course, but just understand that if, for example, one character goes down at the wrong time, that can potentially be a very, very noticeable issue. Also, wait a minute, why are spells only doing 1 damage? That's because they have a tendency to fall off by this point. So this goes back to the previously mentioned armor thing. So with armor scaling up as high as it does in the post-game for this version, it's all about penetration by this point. So it's all about being able to penetrate the whole worm scale type system there. And that would be cool, in theory, if more things were able to do that role. For example, spears, even when they're having a good day, are going to have a hard time scaling hard enough to end up getting past defenses here. Two-handed swords also almost completely drop off, except for when they're being used by the AI, in which case sonic blades are one of the most consistent sources of damage from their side entirely. Basic swords have a tendency to fall off with their basic attacks, but Rending Gale is freakishly powerful. You've got crossbows, which can only do 1 against most targets in many situations, but the Damasc Cbow+1 is basically the strongest weapon in the game bar none, because Death Whale one-shots everything, and it's one-handed. Additionally, it also gives you +2 crossbow rank, which allows you to overcome a lot of its natural issues. If you're using any hybrid type character that happens to use spells at all, as you previously saw, armor by this section of the game it more or less became spell-proof. So this means 2 things. For one thing, your basic kind of missile casters, unless they have high rank augments, and I mean very high rank augments as well as spellcraft, they are simply going to bounce off. They're usually going to bounce off against most targets that you run into. Which, on the flip side, as far as the AI is concerned, means that they love to spam their debuffs because they're looking at the damage that they can do and they're like, well, it doesn't exist. This is pretty worthless. And so they'll reach into their bag of tricks, which then gets us back to the spawning system, believe it or not. Because when it comes to the spawning system, this will suddenly decide, hey, you know what? They needed 2 weapon types, but they also need 2 spell types each. So let's say you run into an area that has a lot of windcasters. Oh, they're going to be using Balmy Breeze a lot. I'm going to go ahead and put on some shields that prevent people from falling asleep. Okay, fantastic. That is a good choice, except for the fact that they also decided to bring Earth for no apparent reason, and now they will petrify everybody instead. Whatever debuff you hope to gain an immunity from, you will then have an equal and opposite debuff that they will then go and screw you over with. This will be a very consistent rule throughout all of it. Like, for example, currently the ninja's legs are broken just because one of the wizards decided so. There was a saying from a guy that makes some really funny videos, the Seth Zintak guy. Was like, yeah, nobody quite abuses you like a wizard, and that's very true in this particular instance. The melee guys, by this point, if they ever do get their weapon ranks up, have a hard time even reaching the fight before it ends, like you see with Mr. Gustin over here, who finally decided to get any kind of action economy in, now that we're roughly a dozen turns into this particular fight. We have Ozma, whose low movement means that she's having a hard time even reaching any fights, despite her being freakishly overpowered, and then you've got Canopus, again, happily one-shotting stuff from a mile away without any MP requirements. We've got the Terror Knight getting abused because that is entirely their role in this particular version. And many classes just kind of grind to a halt around this point, and this is when we can point to, for example, Reborn Again, because you know there's a lot of those skills on lizards, and how there's a lot of just kind of like weird one-off abilities that seem like they would very heavily counter this stuff. Like, hey, what about evade? You can just run in here with evade, right? Sure, you can, but then oftentimes, like, that's one of the few that actually does work particularly well, which gets us even more annoyances. Because yes, they can use evade, and then ninjas can use decoy. The decoy is very quick to pick up, doesn't really cost very much, but it requires consumables to use. The AI will use this 100% of the time on their first turn, which is not exactly ideal. Now, it will cost you a pretty penny, but it is something that you can do yourself, but it's also just kind of annoying to go and set up all the time, so you may not necessarily think to use it all the time. Also, even getting a hold of the ability is not exactly a guaranteed thing. I forget exactly where it was, but the decoy scroll is one of the harder to get ninja abilities. I actually don't think I even have it on my particular one. Let me go ahead and double check real quick. But the funny part is, again, despite being this seemingly rare ability, it's still available on literally every ninja in the game until you recruit them, and then suddenly it doesn't exist anymore. Like, let's go ahead and double check. Do you have... Yeah, she just has the dervish abilities right now. So yeah, they're using skills that you physically can't use, and this also applies to things like summons, where just about every Valkyrie in the postgame has access to summons, meaning that if anything is currently deficient in its defense, you are going to find yourself in a position that they are getting summon spammed immediately to death. Guess who doesn't have access to summons? That's right, your happy ass, because it's going to take a bit of a while to go and find them. Now, again, if you know where to look, you know where to look, but you're probably not finding them naturally. Also, you get even more interesting incongruities in the form of, let's say, just what happened with Ozma over there. So, you know how we have that thing in Reborn where I was talking about how dual wielding is a bit of a scam because it ends up giving you incredibly high recovery time? Well, as you can see, her recovery time is freakishly high, although frankly everyone's is because of weight creep that also happens in the post-game. Okay, so get this. All of your equipment in the post-game, again, this was addressed in Reborn, all of your equipment in the post-game has been progressively getting heavier and heavier as you end up getting more upgraded versions. So all their turns are taking longer and longer, so the AI with their higher stats and lower-end equipment are oftentimes going to outspeed you, and oftentimes go and shut down your entire party with things like you saw right there, where she keeps breaking everybody's legs. Now, surprisingly, this was actually a pretty decent outcome. This is far better than it usually goes, because you do have those cases where you walk into a fight and like a Petrifog and a Balmy Breeze render you completely inept and you just restart because your entire team is just gone all of a sudden. So there are going to be those cases where you're basically just completely hamstrung before the fight even begins. On top of this, On top of this, it's worth noting that, you know what I was talking about earlier with those defensive abilities and accuracy abilities? Yeah, this means that they're constantly running Spell Strike, which means that their debuffs are pretty much guaranteed to hit unless you either have an immunity or you have Spell Ward, in which case you have only like 80% chance to hit. So if you ever wondered why it was that you were locked into, 80% hit odds or whatever else, and you could stack those different 20% in Reborn, more than likely it's a reference to that. So, okay, this version has a lot of weird problems. So you either might potentially level your party wrong and not know about it. You might not have the right equipment and just simply be unable to hurt anything. You might be in a position that you have the equipment and let's say you know where you're going, but you don't have the levels to actually go use said equipment. In which case, it doesn't really do you much good because everything is level capped. And again, you don't know when any of this is happening because, frankly, even the official guide doesn't mention that this is a mechanic. That all of this weird spawning stuff is going to work like it does. Okay? So there's like 101 ways that this can potentially go very wrong. All right? Now, one more note. All right, and then we get to the last pillar, which is basically what happened on my first, well, not really my first, I guess technically my second playthrough of the game, first time attempting to get into postgame, okay? Now, this is what happens when you're vaguely understanding how the skills work. You've sort of figured out and, researched what kind of skills do what, what's potentially useful for what. You maybe have some stuff maxed out. You've figured out what passives you want to be using, and you've been very careful to avoid taking stuff off of certain characters to hopefully avoid running into issues where you move a skill that you shouldn't have and completely ruin them. You've figured out things like, for example, maybe putting a racial skill for a particular damage, particular unit type that they're having a hard time countering. Since again, beast units in the post game are absolute tanks in this version. Like, you'll notice in both One Vision and Reborn, they're basically squishy, but have a lot of skills that they make use of, a lot of sort of momentum type skills. Yeah, because the whole tanking thing that they do in this one is just abhorrently annoying to fight against. So, like, for example, in this case, even with archers being overpowered, he oftentimes would completely bounce off of dragons, so he started using Dragonology, along with his dragon armor there to boost his Dragonology and stuff like that. But then, do you notice something that's missing? Yeah, we're still using basic-ass equipment well into the postgame. Like, we're in Coda, and we're still using basic stuff, so, what now? What do we do with that now? Well, this is when we get to the final and possibly most annoying chapter of this whole thing, which is dealing with nothing. Dealing with the fact that you don't have access to the equipment that you want to get in order to make some progress. Like, you don't know where to get it. Let's say you don't have a guide, and this was before a lot of those guides were available back in the day. Even the official guide didn't really have very good of a drop table as far as where to find everything. So there's a lot of kind of missing gaps in information there, all right? And you're going into fights, and it's like, huh. So that's not very much damage. We're arguably, the same level here. This guy's got pretty decent, decent stats and stuff. This is the best stuff that we can reasonably hope to get a hold of at this point. So, like, why is it completely bouncing off? Is it their lack of, lack of strength? And maybe, I mean, could be, possibly. I mean, does he have a lack of strengthen? No, he's got strengthen too. So why is he having a problem? Why is he unable to do much damage versus this guy? Well, because his weapon is not high quality enough to actually punch past its defenses. So either you need the stats or the skills or the weapon quality to be able to fully punch through. Like this guy over here, Mr. Canopus, he's been here this whole time. He does good damage against some stuff, but against tanks and such, he just completely wings off his axe there. Meanwhile, we have the archer, who does triple the damage that they do, and oftentimes will be able to just sit still and just kill everything from a distance. Because, again, archers were just stupidly overpowered in this one, which is why oftentimes what people would do is just kind of build a team to do whatever, only to then just have a bunch of archers in the back row just sort of killing everything while they got to roleplay with the characters that they actually wanted to use, which is exactly what I did on my first playthrough as well. I'm just like, okay, I can't be bothered with figuring out why on earth all these melee guys do nothing, so they're just going to hold ground and hope for the best and support each other, and then the archer's gonna do the actual killing. And yeah, that's more or less how this ended up going. I mean, this did allow for at least some interesting roleplay stuff. Like I always ran my water wizard over there because I love the idea of just them healing everybody with Gatorade. The Valkyries that later became super overpowered over there in Reborn, just like dying to random throwing axes immediately, fantastic, because their defenses were just absolute ass in this one. Like again, the armor situation was just it was just made of suffering is the thing. There are just so many annoying ways that it just would choose to mistreat you in this one. So like that's the thing with a post game. It could you do it eventually? Yes, but this stuff was really annoying. Like it's just a very, we're just gonna go with not fun way to go and approach stuff. Like you would just get into fights, everything seems all well and good on that first intro map, and then you get two maps in, and suddenly you're in trouble. You are expected to just retreat out and grind up whatever else, and then even if you did grind everything out, if you didn't know where to get the right equipment to go get everybody's everything up, you're stuck. You're not really doing anything other than abusing archers for everything some more. So, like, let's say in this particular save file, I ended up just giving up after a little bit of a while because, simply put, I didn't have the firepower to really break through anything. It just was straight up not happening. So I just kind of left it as it was, and like now recently I've been revisiting it, trying to get a bit more out of these characters because I did like using this team. It did have some fun little immersive moments. But oftentimes you would end up getting stuck, and it's like, did I know to go and grind out recruits in order to pick up unicorn spears and Phorampa because divine was the only way to go with your Valkyries in the post game? No, I didn't really know to do that. Was there a situation that I ever figured out to, let's say, go into what was it? Go into very particular maps in Palace of the Dead in order to basically race the NPCs to go get a crafting book to then go go make better throwing weapons or an upgraded crossbow or something like that. Like, no, I never figured that out growing up. Did I know where to farm out specific drops in order to go get better elemental vests that improved people's power with their weapons? No, I had absolutely no clue. I think I picked up like a Varat's Thundercoat or something at some point over the course of this save file, if I'm not mistaken. I want to say put that on you? Yeah. So, like, she's got a Thundercoat, but I didn't figure out the whole lightning augment thing. And or intended to give her a lightning bow at some point. But even then, if you haven't been training some of these skills since the very beginning of the game, you're just kind of stuck. If you haven't, if you haven't predicted this stuff well ahead of time, your skills might just simply never be up to scratch. Even if you trained parry, deflect, or overpower from the very start of the game, they're still oftentimes going to be far below what the NPCs are going to be running by this point. When it comes to equipment, again, you typically want to recruit them in order to get access to their equipment to use for anything whatsoever. Interestingly enough, by the way, there's this weird thing where they will attempt to use both of their weapon skills in some situations. Like if you saw earlier in San Bronza, I think there was a guy that was using both crossbow and dagger, and basically that's what they were trying to cause this thing to spawn with, because the spawn system in this game is dictated by the skills that they bring. So, for example, it's saying, okay, you have access to the whole spawnable table of equipment, and then in the high-level version, you're given access to accessories. So, hopefully it'll end up spawning with a Damasc dagger and Damasc crossbow, because with it at rank 1, it's seen as a higher rank if he's equipping the Damasc dagger because it comes with a rank bonus. And then the crossbow will hopefully boost this up in rank as well. And it's like, that's cool and all. That's an interesting way to do it. Half the time it doesn't really work though, because, it's just like, hey, but permafrost bow is so much stronger though. I'm just going to use that. Fists and thrown weapons, depending on what they are. So like this guy's a juggernaut. Taking a look at what we see here, I'm assuming, let's see, res. He might be going for just trying to do resistance here. I'm not really sure. Because, yeah, mind plus res on this one. Just mind score, which there aren't too... I don't think there's too many res gloves for this one. Then we get a resistance bonus on Dragon Claws as well. Magebane Band. It feels like that's what they're going for, but I don't know for sure. But still, like the utter randomness of a lot of this stuff, the way that you could get soft locked with a team that just felt like they were having a ton of fun before, only to find out that your coolest builds are just straight up not going to work, and now you're going to have to go and restart from scratch. And it had a tendency to be really demoralizing, you know? So most folks ended up burning out pretty darn quickly, and this right here, this is just the beginning. Like, this is just the very start. And you can just imagine how it scales up from here. I mean, are there ways around it? Yeah, absolutely. Like, go see the solo run for that particular thing. Honestly, this game, it's bizarre in that challenge running it is one of the most just strange things out there, because you've got this weird incongruity of, on the one hand, if you try to solo it, it's going to be one of the easiest solos of your life. But then if you try to go and use a wide, varied team with all these different skills, your lack of specialization is going to make it super difficult. Or let's say you try to do a single class challenge. Way harder than it is in most other games of its type. But at the same time, if you try to use too many classes, it's also a similar issue. So you've got to like figure out that little zone in the middle of about 3 to 4 classes, which is what most people ended up doing. It's like you focus a little bit, you focus on organizing your desk, but you ignore the larger office, or else you will be fired. That's sort of the message that it's trying to send you. You know, a lot of your craftable equipment was on rare drops in weird locations, so oftentimes, just like you see in this particular save file, it was just going to be in locations that you never would think to look. Like the particular bow upgrade for this thing was, I think, on the final floor of Phorampa Wildwood in that volcano map, dropped by a particular archer that oftentimes would get their stuff stolen because they would usually be one of the squishier targets and usually a pretty big threat, so you'd get rid of them early in order to try and you know, get rid of them out of that fight, only to then find out later, hey, that bag that the AI kept stealing over and over was actually the crafting book that he was dropping. Or let's say, you know, you got like 3 pieces of unique equipment as well as a crafting book for, I think, like arm guards or something in Pirate's Graveyard, and then just like nothing else, unless you come back during a particular side quest. And then you've got Palace of the Dead, which you can clear the entire thing of and maybe get like 1 or 2 drops. Like, it was very, very stingy on its drops. It was very random the locations you would find it. Like, famously, the frickin' Notos is inside of a flesh golem that has to be exorcised, something like 90 floors into Palace of the Dead. It's the only time you can get one. I don't know why it's there, but yeah, like, that's Tactics Ogre PSP for you. Like, this is the reason that this post game was absolutely just viewed as utterly abhorrent by those that ended up going and experiencing it, because it took all of the beauty, the fun of creativity, of, you know, putting together your custom teams and whatever else, and it's like, what if we took that concept of optimizing the fun out of this game and we made it mandatory? Like, man, why you gotta do this? Why did you take the fun and shoot it in the face? But yeah, that's why folks that experience this love the Reborn version, generally speaking, because it's like, hey, look, you can actually do the fun builds. You can actually do the things that are interesting to use, and not friggin' Naked Knight with phalanx going and aggroing all the attacks while 9 archers repeatedly one-shot everything. Like, that is just super boring, you know. But elemental counters, debuff counters, all that kind of thing, that's pretty fun. Losing half your team to random ghosts with debuffs that surround you at the start of the fight and give you no options ahead of time, yeah, that part kind of sucks. Now, I didn't get to all the examples. Obviously, it would take a really long time to get to them here, but I'm hoping you at least get the general idea. Okay, thank you guys for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.